5, 6, 7, 8.
Hi EXers, welcome to the EX Podcast episode number 11. This is your host, Stefan Vincent. I've started this podcast because I believe that companies have to think of themselves as employment brands if they hope to attract and retain talent. This podcast brings a different lens to the employee experience, a brand and customer experience angle rather than a traditional HR angle. Our guests, all thought leaders and disruptors in the EX space in their own way, come to this show to debate, discuss, and share best practices on the key components that foster employee engagement and strengthen company culture, and also to spark the conversation on how to create positive employee experiences. Now, let's be real. Employee disengagement is a big issue. Only 30% of employees worldwide feel engaged at work, and 20% declare they just don't give a crap about their work. The other 50% are in the twilight zone of engagement, not fully engaged, not completely switched off either. There's not much companies can do with the 20% paycheck suckers who just show up at work because they have to in order to collect their dues. Instead, companies should focus on the 50% of employees semi-engaged. That's where companies can make a difference and impact their bottom line. Here, our guests share with you how we can make it happen together. Today's guest is Paul Darwish, Chief Development Officer and Director of Marketing at Graydon. Graydon is a 140-year-old law firm like no others. Let me put it this way. Not many people associate a law firm with innovation, brand experience, and employee engagement, right? Well, Graydon is an exception. Today with Paul, we'll talk about how Graydon went through a rebranding that was more than just changing the logo, how the firm has developed a focus on innovation, and how their rebranding initiative changed its relationship with its customers, but also and mostly with its employees. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you get a chance, please make sure to review the podcast on iTunes. You can open the iTunes app and type in Stefan Vincent or EX Podcast, and you will find us there. And last thing, if you want to send me feedback, suggestions for future topics or guests, you can reach me at svincent@exsummit.com or on Twitter at @EX_summit. All right, let's get to it now. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the EX Podcast. Very excited for today's guest, Paul Darwish, Chief Business Officer and Director of Marketing at Graydon. I think the best way to describe Graydon is that it's a law firm like no others, a 140-year-old firm based in Cincinnati with a focus on innovation. Paul, thanks so much for being with us today.
My pleasure, Stefan. Thank you.
When we connected the first time, I was really intrigued by the idea of doing a podcast or an episode with a law firm and about the employee experience. And simply because in my mind, a law firm is typically very traditional, almost old school, with limited understanding of the importance and impact of branding and the employee experience, or even customer experience. So how is Graydon different?
That's a good question, and I agree with you that this industry is indeed very traditional. We're probably 25 years behind most other industries. Up until a couple years ago, we still had secretaries. We still had very traditional office space, bigger offices for the big producing partners and smaller offices for associates. So Graydon has had a reputation of being traditional. It's the oldest general practice law firm in Cincinnati. Been around since 1871.
It's amazing.
But, part of what allows you to sustain yourself for 145 years is being able to adapt. And so we recently went through a strategic planning process And as part of that, we created a vision to become the most innovative and vibrant law firm in Cincinnati. And so that was certainly aspirational. It's not who we were, but it's been a fascinating journey for the last 3.5 to 4 years of reinventing ourselves. And I think we've done a really nice job of doing that.
So we talked very briefly about what Graydon does, and what do you do exactly as Chief Business Officer and Director of Marketing at Graydon? And what's been your role into that initiative and journey?
So we are 75 attorneys. I'll start there. Our focus is wholly on Cincinnati. While we have some clients outside the Cincinnati area, we just have 4 offices here in the Cincinnati area. We are a general practice firm, so we pretty much do everything that businesses would need, and most of our business is business to business. So we do operating agreements, startup agreements. We have tax attorneys, real estate attorneys, employment attorneys. So anything a business might need, we're able to do for them, with the possible exception of serious patent or those sorts of issues. We also have an estate planning group. We've done estate planning for 6 consecutive Procter & Gamble chairmen. So that's deep in our DNA as well. And that's one of the few areas where we're working one-on-one with individuals rather than businesses. So we have a good mix of clients. Our sweet spot is probably clients between $10 million and $200 million. And we've got some on either side of that. We do work for public companies and we do work for startups. My role, in answer to your question, is to work with each of our 75 attorneys in a coaching, consulting role to try to get them to think about their practice as they're very good at practicing law. They're not so good at thinking about their practice as a business. So we talk about how they can develop their clients. We talk about how they can identify other prospects. We talk about building relationships. We talk about working with other attorneys across the firm to have more touch points. So that's probably half my job is one-on-one coaching consulting. And then another 25% of my job is being out in the community and networking and playing matchmaker. When I see a company that has needs, I'll pair them up with an attorney that might be able to help them. And then another 25% is overseeing the traditional marketing. And as you know, we recently went through a rebranding process and created a new website along with a physical move. So it's been a full year for us.
Yes. So let's talk about this. Your firm went through a rebranding, as you said. But to be clear, it was not just about changing the logo or cutting the head of Graydon, which used to be Graydon Head before.
Correct.
You literally went through a thorough culture assessments, which led to a major shift in the organization and how the business looks at its HR function, customer experience, and obviously employee experience. Can you explain what the process was and what was the outcome?
It was a terrific experience for me and for our firm, I think. Importantly, we engaged an outside branding firm. The folks at Kolar Design, their sweet spot is sort of brand and space. And Bill Thiemann is a talented branding expert over at Kolar. So Bill sort of led the project, and it included things like employee surveys, what they like about the firm, things they wish the firm might do better. We also did a couple of offsites. So we took 20 folks offsite and did some really interesting experiential exercises to get at a sense of who we are. So the whole point of doing the deep dive into the brand was to get at the essence of the brand. What's in the Graydon DNA. We had the vision, which was more aspirational, to become innovative and vibrant, but we also want to be very clear about who we are and who we have been and how we're perceived by clients. As one of my favorite authors, Jim Collins, says, your values are discovered. They're not created. So we really spent about 6 months kind of doing a deep dive into the brand. And what we came out of that with was this lovely narrative. And the main theme was about connection. So Graydon is a firm that's deeply connected to the community. We're focused wholly on Cincinnati. We're deeply connected to our clients, oftentimes across generations because of the length of our history. We're deeply connected to one another. And so that connections theme was really the guiding theme along with the vision as we recreated the brand, if you will.
What was the process with the employees? How many of them were involved in the journey, and what was the level of participation?
We had, it's interesting to note that we're also in the process of thinking about moving our physical space, which we did do. And so we also were doing lots of surveys on the physical space side of things. In that case, we actually surveyed all of our employees in terms of what they like about the space, what they like about the firm, how they use the space, what they like in a new space. And so you have that going on with the entire firm was surveyed. On the branding side, we did a couple surveys that were firm-wide, but there was a core group of about 20 folks that included attorneys, some administrative folks, some people in marketing, some people in finance. And those are the folks that really focus on just the brand work itself. And then of that 20, there was sort of a core group of 3 on my branding team that was doing the heavy lifting day to day. But it was interesting. We made a conscious decision to get good diversity in terms of viewpoints, gender, age, just sort of how people saw the firm. And I was really concerned if we were going to be able to arrive at this one spot, this one theme, because we have 75 attorneys. They're all very different people in very different practice areas. And would there be an overarching theme that kind of brings us all together under the Graydon umbrella? And it was very satisfying at the end when we came up with this connections theme. I think it does that quite nicely and still allows people to kind of be who they are and express themselves as the unique individuals and attorneys that they are.
Did you come up with a new values, or a new mission or brand statements after this exercise, or was it just to reinforce some of the statements that previously existed? What was the result?
I would say it was more of an affirmation of kind of who we thought we were. I've been here 5 years, and I remember in my early interviews with our attorneys, I would always ask them sort of who is Graydon and what's important and how are we different than other folks. And the response I seemed to get over and over again was, relationships are paramount here at Graydon. Relationships with one another, relationships with client. It's not about the transaction. It's about the long-term relationship. And so as we went into the branding process, I think that connections theme really captured that focus on relationships very well. Now, I will say that that had some implications for sort of how do we market ourselves, what the brand looked like, what the space looked like. And probably the biggest change that was driven as a result of the rebrand was our space, because we talked a lot about, collaboration, working together with one another. But the space that we had really did not allow that, didn't foster collaboration internally, and didn't really encourage us to bring people from outside the firm into the firm. So that was probably the biggest benefit of the rebrand, was the effect that it had on space, and as a result of that, the effect it's had on culture.
Was there a specific aha moments when you had those ideation sessions and brainstorming sessions that actually sort of had the company or yourself leading the charge to pivot to one type of experience to another?
We have a very talented attorney here, Bruce Petrie, who's also a very talented artist. And Bruce often talks about how attorneys see the world in terms of words, and so they're not the most visual people in the world. So one of my favorite exercises, and perhaps the biggest aha moment we had, was Bill led us through this exercise where we had sort of 20, 25 different visual images, and we had to whittle those down to sort of the 3 to 5 images captured the essence of the firm. And then we finally arrived at one. And it was this picture of sort of 5 people in a muddy rugby field with their arms around each other, with this idea that we're in it together. We're in it together with one another. We're in it together with our clients. We're in it together with the community. So it was interesting that the aha moment was really this visual, this photo that sort of captured the essence of who we are. And then out of that came a beautiful brand narrative, which we work with on the agency to create, that sort of drove the rest of the branding process.
So you mentioned earlier that Graydon has a big focus on innovation. So first of all, I wonder how innovation and a law firm can be compatible. That's one thing.
It's a great question.
And so how do you approach innovation at Graydon?
I remember early on in my tenure, I came across a study that was about how attorneys are different from the general population in terms of psychological characteristics. And it was very helpful to me, because in a business development role, attorneys aren't really wired for business development. They're not by nature the most social beings. They tend to be introverts rather than extroverts. They're not resilient, so they don't like no. They tend to be perfectionists, so they're always looking for the problems with an idea rather than the possibilities of an idea. So having those ideas or having those characteristics as background was good for me. So if I get frustrated, I say, hey, that's just sort of how they're wired. So innovation in a law firm is not easy. Attorneys are wired to say no more than yes. I mean, that's sort of their disposition. They're looking for reasons why you can't do things rather than why you can do things. So as part of the strategic planning process, one of the more helpful visuals that we came away with was there's a time for attorneys to wear their attorney hats, when they have to be 100% correct. If they're doing a deal, they got to make sure all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed. But then there's another part of their practice or the partnership where they have to put their business hats on. And the business hat's very different. You don't have to have 100% certainty. If you're 2/3 certain, you can go. And it's okay to fail over here on the business side of things where attorneys are very resistant to failure. So part of the way you foster a culture of innovation in a law firm is learning and teaching your attorneys to say yes more often. And also getting them to understand that we're going to have some failures. We're going to try to start some new practice areas, and it might not work. And that's okay. But to have a truly innovative culture, you have to be willing to fail, and you have to be willing to try new things, which is not the easiest thing for attorneys to do.
What's the average tenure at Graydon among the attorneys and lawyers?
So we've got 75 attorneys, and of those, half of those are partners. So you have 37 or 38 partners. It's a good 7 to 10 year track to partnership. So most of the partners are in their, at the youngest, their late 30s, and many of the partners are on the other side of 50, 55. And it's not unique to Graydon, but a lot of law firms are really up against the challenge of succession planning and transition planning because a lot of the big rainmakers are about to retire in the next 5 years. And then on the other side, you've got a lot of associates. Another thing that's changed in the world of law is there used to be a lot more leverage. So you used to have a lot more associates per partner than you do now, whereas now it's sort of a 1-to-1 ratio, which makes it a little bit more challenging to drive that leverage. So the answer to your question is, our youngest attorney is 27 and the oldest attorney is 70. But the biggest producers tend to be on the other side of 55. And so one of the issues we're really focused on is this idea of transition or succession planning.
Was it hard to get buy-in from more traditional employees at Graydon?
Yes. So, one of the things that came out of the strategic planning process is we wanted to create a very aggressive business development culture. So from 1970 all the way through 2008, when the world changed, the legal pie grew. People spend more and more money every year with law firms. And all of a sudden, the world got turned upside down in 2008, and demand began to shrink for the first time in a couple of generations. Yeah. So then it became a market share game. And all of a sudden, you have other law firms trying to get our clients, and we had to sort of come to the realization that, hey, this is about market share. We've got to be out there spending time with our clients and spending time with other prospects. And so having a very aggressive business development culture was difficult for some of the more senior folks. They kind of wrap their head around because that's just not the way law was done, 25, 30 years ago. And initially we said everybody has to play. So everybody has to do business development, and we'll play to your strengths. So if you like to present, you can present. If you prefer networking events, you can do that. If you want to write white papers, you can do that, but you have to play. But I would tell you, in all honesty, about 2 years into this, it became pretty clear that, there was a handful of people that probably just weren't going to play. And so I think my time anyway is better spent with those folks that have the most interest and most aptitude to really move the needle in terms of business development, if that makes sense.
So now that you've moved into the implementation, right, and you live day after day that sort of cultural shift within the company, what's the response of those who were a bit behind in the process now? Do they really feel engaged into the change, or are they still a bit reluctant to it?
Well, it's important to note that, we came out with a new brand and a new website, and we physically moved our office space all in the same day, October 3rd of last year, 2016. And so we've been in the same office building for almost 50 years. And so the brand and the website but in particular, the space has had just a profound impact on our people. They love the new space. It's got lots of natural light. It's got lots of space for collaboration. A lot more transparency. The office walls, the offices are all standard size. They've got standing desks. They've got glass fronts. So we see a lot more of one another, and there's just a lot more informal, sort of coffee talk, water cooler talk. And so I would tell you that the transformation has been profound, but that probably has to do mostly with the space, and then also with the website and the brand.
We'll share some pictures of the space on our website, but to get a bit more specific on the space itself, what was the process behind literally transforming how a typical law firm office space is? I assume that you worked with an agency to design the new office space, but what was the process behind it? Were there specific thoughts about we need to get more together, we need to collaborate more, we need also some quiet space? What was the idea and the process behind it?
I think the fact that we were redoing the brand and also recreating the website at the same time as we were considering the move of our physical space was a good stroke of, it was strategic on our part, but it was also very fortunate. Because I would say the combination of the vision that we wanted to be the most innovative and vibrant firm in Cincinnati, and the brand, we're all about connections and relationships and collaboration. Those two things together made it very clear that our existing space was not viable going forward. It was not innovative. It was not vibrant. It did not foster collaboration. So I think the vision and the brand really drove the process of looking for space. And again, that was a good aha moment. There's a lot of bad office space in the world. Yeah. We probably looked at 10 different spots. And then when we came across this particular space, we knew it. And it's like buying a house. The minute you walked in the door, this space happens to have a beautiful river view of the Ohio River and suspension bridges right outside our door, outside our windows. And so we knew in an instant that this space was right for us. And we had to do a lot of designing. And again, we had Kolar that did the branding work, and they partnered with our architectural firm. That's a longtime partner. So there was some good creative tension in there as well. But it was, at the end of the day, easy for us to choose this space. And then also, importantly, the best part of our space is the South River facing views. And to our partners' credit, they took almost 4,000 square feet of the best views and gave that to our clients in terms of an open client entertainment and collaboration space. So kudos to our partners for putting our clients front and center.
Were some of the employees involved in putting together the concept for the new space and designing it?
Yes, we have a design committee, which again consisted of attorneys, some marketing folks, some staff working in concert with the real estate company. They also had an interior designer on staff, Kolar, who did our brand again, and then Hickson, the architectural firm. So there was a lot of cooks in the kitchen, which I think made for a more interesting product at the end of the day.
So why has developing the brand or rebranding Graydon have an impact on sort of better defining what the employer brand is as a whole? So obviously you focused on the business brand or the customer brands. Have you also worked on what the employer brand is as you fight to either retain talent or attract new talent?
That's a good question. One of the things about professional services is that you can't really experience the Graydon brand without experiencing our people, right? I mean, to experience Graydon, you need to engage an attorney. So at the end of the day, our people and also our space in large measure, our space is sort of the equivalent of packaging for a consumer good. We have a lot of people in our space, both for events and also one-on-ones. So I think this recognition that our people in our space is in large measure our brand was very important, sort of driving the process forward. And I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought, Stefan. Your question was about...
We were talking about so obviously you focused on the business brands. Did it have any impact on how you looked at your employer brand?
Yes. So I think another important variable in all of this is sort of the macro context, right? Millennials becoming such an important part of the workplace, and they're going to be running the joint in the next 10 to 15 years. And so the things that are important to them, daylight, open space, ability to work remotely, all of those things were also important in terms of driving what the space looked like. And so making sure that we heard those voices loudly and clearly, and those really came through in the surveys that we did with our people. There was a real desire for more open, more collaborative spaces. So I think that was really the beginning for us, to be honest with you, because as you mentioned earlier, law firms tend to be very traditional. Mm-hmm. They tend to be more top down. And so I think listening to our people on both the brand and the space was the first time we really took employee engagement seriously in a long time. And I think that's going to serve us well moving forward. And my hope is that we're going to continue to listen to our people in terms of what's important to them on all sorts of issues, from HR issues to marketing issues to space issues moving forward.
So you talked about listening to the employees. Did you have in place, or do you have in place, sort of a system or process to listen to the employees, to record their aspirations, their wishes, their inputs?
We do not, and I have to tell you that I really appreciated the recent EX Summit that we had in Cincinnati. Because it really brought that issue to the fore for me. One of the things we've done really well, I think, in our firm over the last 2 years is listen more intently to our clients, our customers. We've done online surveys with them. We do something called the Voice of the Customer, where the managing partner and I go out and spend an hour in their office just listening to them tell us about their business. We're going to engage a third party to do some surveys as well. So we've gotten really good on the client side. And we've done almost nothing on the employee side, with the recent exception of the space. So I'm excited to think about that in a more intentional way, and really look forward to creating some tools or finding some tools out there so that we can make sure that we're listening to our people consistently and deeply, if that makes sense.
For our listeners who work in a traditional industry like banking, insurance, legal counsel, what are some of the steps to consider when thinking about, or let's call it, a cultural rebranding?
All of those industries you just mentioned, in addition to being traditional, they're commodities of some sort. So it's really hard to differentiate yourself as a law firm or as a bank, right? And another cliche that exists in those industries is that our people are our greatest asset, right? Uh-huh. So we talk about how the people are the brand, the people are the greatest asset, but I'm not sure we really spend enough time, listening to people in terms of what's important to them and how we can better serve and feed them in their professional development. And then B, making sure they have the tools to work together and work in the community. So if you look at our website, we really celebrate our people. We've engaged an outside writer who's very talented, and he does something called My Story. So he interviews each of our attorneys and sort of summarizes their life story in 700 words in a very interesting, compelling way. And then we've complemented that with some interesting photographs. We have a very talented photographer at the firm, and she's gone out and taken photos of people doing things they love: hunting, fishing, baking with their kids. And so if you go to our site, and if you come to the firm, you'll see a real focus and celebration of our people. So I would say in all those industries you mentioned, if it's all about the people, I think you need to take time listening to your people, developing your people, and celebrating your people as being the key differentiators versus the competition.
Any other things to consider? Obviously, as you said, like when you think of a bank or law firm, it's a very commoditized service offering, right? I mean, the products are the same. When you talk about a law firm, advice or counsel is the same from one to another. It's really about the human relationship between the organization and customers. Now, beyond the focus on listening to the employees, trying to understand what their needs and aspirations are, trying to understand their behaviors, are there other things that companies should consider when they're talking about rebranding or even changing their culture?
I think one of the greatest benefits of a rebranding effort is the clarity it brings you in terms of your core values. And I'm a big believer in the importance of core values and being clear about those, because those should guide everything a firm does. I mean, your strategies and your tactics might change over the years, but really your core values shouldn't change. And so for us, I think gaining more clarity around the core values and also gaining and using those in terms of hiring. So if we want to have a business development culture that's really focused on relationship building, we need to hire people that value relationships. And not everybody does. I mean, some attorneys are just brilliant tacticians or technicians. They're good in the field, but they don't really want to focus on the developing of relationships. And there might be a role for, one or two of those people here or there in sort of discrete areas. But I think in terms of hiring, the brand is essential and the core values are essential in being clear about. In terms of professional development, again, if we're all about relationships, what are we doing in terms of training our people and encouraging our people to develop better relationships internally and externally? So I think those core values should really influence everything that a firm does, and those core values can often become made clear through a branding process. So very thankful for the last year that we've spent focused on kind of who we are and where we're headed.
So we talked about a lot of very good changes that happened over the past year or so at Graydon. Going through that cultural rebranding, have you seen that the perception of your customers has changed when they look at Graydon now? Has it had an impact outside of the firm as well as inside of the firm?
Without question. So we've probably had more events in the 6 months we've been in our new space than we had in the 6 years before we moved from our old space. So just getting people in your physical space is always beneficial. There's the adage in retail: the more time people spend in your shop, the more they're going to buy. It's just a fact. So I think getting people in our space has been great, but the reaction that they have when they come here is the best part of it. So when we laid out the vision for what we wanted the new space to be, we had probably 50 adjectives, happy, positive, expansive, celebrates color. One of the words we had on that list was wow. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard people get off the elevators, turn towards the river in the reception area and say, wow, I can't believe this is a law firm. So yeah, we have completely changed the perception of who we are in the marketplace. And I think it bodes well for the future of the firm.
Can you describe a bit to us, obviously we saw some pictures, but what the space looks like?
So one of the key, if you go into most law offices, right, you're going to get off the elevator and you're going to come upon some dark wood, right, very traditional furnishings, probably a receptionist sitting behind the desk. We did away with the traditional reception. So I think the first thing you'll notice, other than the expansive, beautiful views of the Northern Kentucky hillsides, is the fact that we don't have a reception area. It's more of a concierge desk that you would find at a hotel. We had a custom-made desk that has a river running through it, river motif, very subtle. And then we have our hospitality coordinator standing behind that, greeting people, welcoming them into the cafe around the corner where we have gourmet coffee and a refrigerator stocked full of drinks, beautiful, comfortable chairs overlooking the river and the bridges. So the experience of getting off the elevator is very different than 98% of other law firms. We've had more than one person ask us if this was a design firm. They thought they were in a design firm. They came here for a different event, and they had no idea this was a law firm. So we love those kinds of reactions. That's exactly what we're after in terms of creating space that's both innovative and vibrant.
It's interesting because typically when you think, or at least when I think of space designed for law firms, you have those massive desks and
right.
You have that massive chair where the lawyer sits in just to be in a sort of a position of power, and then you have the client on the other side sitting on the lower level or a smaller chair feeling like less empowered or less more into the passive position versus active.
Those are the same law firms that talk about being client-centric as well. And it's just laughable, right? You go into their space, and the best space is reserved for their people, not their clients. The cushiest chairs are reserved for their people, not their clients. And to be honest, we had a little bit of that at the old space. And part of it's just sort of what you inherit and what has been true over time. But this was a great opportunity for us to say, if we're all about the client, then we should really devote the best in our space to our clients and make sure they feel as comfortable and as welcome as possible. Because, let's be honest, most visits with attorneys are not enjoyable experiences that people look forward to. You're usually dealing with issues. It's costing you money. So we try to take what is oftentimes an unpleasant experience and make it as pleasant as possible.
So speaking of this, it's a very interesting topic too. We talked a bit offline about empathy. Right? Is empathy a real differentiator for lawyers and attorneys when actually they deal with clients? No, you were talking earlier about, again, services being very commoditized. Is the empathy a differentiator when it comes to attracting customers and or employees as well? Absolutely.
One of the words I detest the most in the world of law is this idea of going after new business. They call it pitching. We're going to make the pitch. And we tried to take that word out of our vocabulary, and we constantly talk about doing more catching, more listening than pitching. One of the things I noticed early on about attorneys is they love language, they love words, so they like to talk. And it's not just unique to attorneys, but a lot of professionals, accountants, doctors, they always think that the smartest person in the room is going to get the deal or get the nod. And that's only a small part of it. I mean, at the end of the day, people do business with people that they like. And so we talk a lot about being likable. And one of the easiest ways to be likable, to be interesting, is to be interested. So take time to listen to your clients and ask good questions about their business, about their personal lives. And so I always tell our attorneys that if they're going to lunch or going to somebody's office, a client or a prospect, they should walk away from that meeting having listened 80% of the time and talked only 20% of the time. So, yeah, I think empathy is a huge differentiator and something clients are hungry for.
Have you seen an improvement in the active listening and the empathy since you changed the culture and the space itself, or has it always been the same?
I had an interesting conversation with an attorney yesterday. Another thing that surprised me, I've been here 5 years now, and I remember after 3 months, the managing partner asked me to come to the partners meeting and sort of give my thoughts. And the two biggest impressions I had out of the gate, being fresh to this industry, one was that partners don't really talk to one another. It's a partnership, but they have trouble having difficult conversations. So a lot of things go unspoken, and that really surprised me because I figured attorneys are bright, they're curious, they're comfortable mixing it up. They probably have some knockdown, drag-out meetings in their partners' meetings, and the reality was they don't really talk about anything. It's sort of the agenda, and they kind of bless it and move on. And I think part of what drives that, and the other biggest surprise I had early on in my experience here, is that attorneys, people that deal with conflict day in, day out, solving problems, are conflict avoiders. They don't like conflict at all. And so it's taken time, but we're just now getting to the point where we recognize that we have to get better at having difficult conversations. We have to get better at being able to disagree with one another and moving on. And we have to get better at listening to one another. So I had mentioned the strategic planning process we went through. We created a vision to become the most innovative and vibrant law firm in town. Well, we recently did strategic planning 2.0, and we added to that vision this notion of becoming more diverse and more inclusive. So that's going to be a focus for us really the next 3 to 5 years, is doing a better job internally, listening to one another, and then doing a better job reaching out into different parts of the community and becoming a more diverse and inclusive firm.
Very interesting. We're going to get closer to the end. So Now, I have to put you on the spot because you spoke at EX Cincinnati a few weeks ago, and you had some very good jokes about attorneys and lawyers. So could you give us a couple of jokes?
A couple of attorney jokes?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, this was, it gets back to this notion of we wanted to take this experience that's often unpleasant and make it a pleasant one. And I was curious, why is it that people have such issues with attorneys? And I thought I'd look up some of my favorite jokes. So here are a couple for you. One is, what do you call a smiling, courteous person at a bar association convention? The caterer. This might be my favorite one. What's the difference between a lawyer and God? God doesn't think he's a lawyer.
That's a very good one, yeah.
And then one more for you. What's the difference between a lawyer and a prostitute? A prostitute will stop screwing you when you're dead. So these are funny, but they get the notion of sort of issues that people have with attorneys, that they're not trustworthy, that they're greedy, that they're self-serving. And rather than avoid, those perceptions out there and pretend they don't exist, we decided to take those head on. And I think if you look at our brand, they really answer each of those things. We are very community oriented. We always have. We have people to serve on boards, and we give, I think, over 12,000 hours of community service last year. We have this policy of giving first. So we open up our space and allow community organizations to use that for free. So we're really trying to change the way people perceive attorneys and law firms and really give them a different experience that's not unpleasant.
It's a good way to conclude this conversation. I think it's a very nice way to summarize what we all discussed this morning. Typically at this point in the podcast, I like to ask one or two personal questions to our guests so that our listeners can get to know them a bit more intimately. So is there a secret or something that people may not think of when they see you for the first time that you may want to disclose?
Sure. So, if you look at my resume, it's fairly traditional. I came out of college and went to work at Procter & Gamble in marketing, and then went to work for a small family firm, got my MBA, did a couple of other things where I wore a coat and tie every day. But about 10 years ago, I took a right-hand turn and took some time off and became an ordained interfaith minister. So there's a interfaith group out of New York City. It was co-founded by a rabbi and a priest back in the early 80s, called the New Seminary at the time. So I took 2 years and did that, and wonderful chance to kind of pause and reflect. And I've really sort of brought some of the key learnings from that experience into my work day in and day out. So this notion of looking at all the world's great traditions and how they view certain issues, whether it's compassion or justice or fairness, really enriched my own tradition, having been grown up Catholic. It didn't detract from it, it enriched it. And so that ability to value other perspectives has been invaluable in my more traditional corporate work. So I'm very thankful for that. And I've also done, I think, 15 weddings now and a couple of funerals on the side. So that's one thing. And then out of that experience, it was my daily practice for 4 years to write a haiku each morning. So sort of a spiritual haiku, if you will. It might summarize a life experience I had or a key teaching I just read about as part of my class or journey. And so I've got a collection of 4 years. Every morning for 4 years, I wrote a daily haiku. So I've got 1,500 haiku lined up, and my hope is to publish a book sometime in the coming year on that. So.
Good. I'll watch for it. Is there a way for our listeners to follow you and Graydon on social media? So we talked about the website. Could you give us the address for the website first of all, so we can take a look further at the firm and its people, some of the pictures of the space, and also on LinkedIn or Twitter?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm glad you asked about the URL, because we were one of the first law firms in the country, speaking of being innovative, to use the .law. So our URL is www.graydon.law. And we weren't sure how that was going to play, to be honest with you. It was a bit of a risk. And we've had, just a couple of minor hiccups in terms of emails getting caught in people's filters. But it's been good for us, and I think going forward it's going to serve us well from a marketing perspective. So Graydon Law is the URL out there on LinkedIn as well. Graydon, a Facebook page too, and people are more than welcome to reach out to me via email at pdarwish@graydon.law as well.
Great. Well, thank you for your time, Paul. I really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the EX Podcast. If you want to learn more, visit our website at expodcast.com. If you want to find out more about our next conferences, go to exsummit.com. Finally, you can also find my manifesto on business to employee or B2E branding at b2ebranding.co. See you next week.